I'm Scott Al Miller, and I'm an immigrant that lives in León, Nicaragua. Today I'm going to have a relatively fast one. We talk pretty often about the concept of expats and immigrants, but I got a really great note today that I wanted to share with you guys because it gives a little bit of color and important legal information, taking this to a different level. So often we talk about this linguistically, but it is important to talk about it legally as well, and it's important because while some jurisdictions take truth to be a fungible thing that doesn't really matter from a legal perspective, some jurisdictions take it very seriously. It's important to understand when you're repeating something that is simply a marketing phrase or a propaganda phrase, and when you're repeating something that is a legal one and must be true. So we're going to explain what we mean and go into that right after the bump. So thanks to Eric, who's out in Bolivia right now and saw this note. I don't know if he received this or saw it on a expat who lives in Thailand, but this is a really important one. Now, we talk a lot about in English. This is clear cut, right? Expat refers to people who are living outside of their home country. Everybody who lives outside their home country is an expat. That is why you can always use the term expat safely, while you should use the term expat liberally. You should not be holding back on expat. You need to be careful of anyone who's going to tell you you're not an expat, you're an immigrant, because these people are straight up lying. Now, I don't know whether they're confused or just trying to cause you mental distress or trying to manipulate you or simply trying to make you feel bad, but it is straight up dishonesty because it's impossible to be an immigrant without also being an expat. So to say to someone, you're not an expat, you're an immigrant, isn't a possible honest statement. So anyone who says this under any conditions in English is lying. Now, they may not know that they're lying, but this is only said in this way to be aggressively harmful. It is never said to be a nice thing. So watch out for that. It's something we warn people about a lot, because if you are researching being an expat, trying to get honest information, looking at real channels, this is an important bit of communications, and you will almost certainly either find that people are aggressive towards you because they simply don't like you as whatever you're from. It's a racist remark the way that it's used, or they are trying to manipulate you or whatever. This is always something you have to watch out for. So just be aware of that being a thing. Expat means you live outside of your home country. Immigrant means you are a permanent resident of a new one. So many people overlap, but because this is misused in the United States for nefarious purposes, we have to be super careful, because in America, we often say things like illegal immigrant when we mean illegal expat or undocumented expat or whatever. Anytime you hear someone say immigrant in those cases, you really should be saying to yourself, how do they know if they're an immigrant? There's no way that they know. They know they're an expat. They may know that they're illegal, but they certainly don't know if they're an immigrant. And the concept of being an illegal immigrant doesn't really make sense, because under normal circumstances, we assume that legality is necessary to be an immigrant. Are you truly an immigrant if you're not legal? Are you really permanent? Well, you may be intending to stay, so that's why we give it some gray area. But generally, the concept of immigrant implies legality. So if you say illegal immigrant, instantly that should set off red flags that at least it sounds confusing, if not straight up misleading. What we should be saying is illegal expat, and language matters, right? But in the United States, famously, and this is a big thing, it was in the news this morning that I'm recording this from The Guardian, the United Nations is re-looking at the problems caused by the U.S. pushing through a lack of honesty controls, pushing for this propaganda laws to protect false information, misinformation, and propaganda around the world that they've been doing since the 1930s. Ever since the League of Nations, the U.S. has been protecting false speech. And this is a very harmful thing, and democracies around the world have to protect against this. It's something we worry about. But as Americans, we constantly hear this thing of using immigrant when we clearly intend to mean expat. When you're living abroad, when you're like me, you're always an expat. But I am an immigrant. I have my paperwork. I am permanent and legal here in Nicaragua. So I'm a great example of both, but I can always say expat. You can never correct someone when they say they're an expat unless they actually live in the country that they're from, right? If I was to move back to my home country, then I would stop being an expat. So that would be different. So obviously, on one hand, we want to make sure that we get these words correct because words matter and truth is truth, and if we use words incorrectly, that's actually just lying. So now we know better. We want to tell the truth and not mislead people. Even if it's just to avoid confusion, that's a good thing. But more importantly, using the wrong terms is damaging, especially because so many people use them incorrectly only when speaking about certain racial groups or ethnic groups or nationalities, right? Depending on where you are, there is a trend to correctly refer to, for example, Americans, Canadians, and Western Europeans. When they move abroad, we tend to say expat, which is 100% correct 100% of the time. But when people from, say, Africa or South America or Southeast Asia move into those places, we almost never call them expats, even though they are 100% of the time, and we often refer to them as immigrants, which could be true in some circumstances, but is rarely true. Using immigrant as a blanket term is always incorrect, and it is used intentionally, not by all people, but the source of its misuse is an intentional one to make people fearful. People don't fear expats because they're so likely to be transitory and so likely to be a positive impact on your country. But immigrant, it has this potential, especially in American history, to be us taking people from places that are displaced and early on in American history, not displaced by America. People coming from Eastern Europe, for example, people who are going through political turmoil or droughts or famines or things like that, right? We all know the Irish potato famine, for example, or the turmoil of the foundation of the Italian Empire in the late 1800s, right? These things triggered major upheaval, whether food supply or lack of jobs or whatever, in parts of Europe. These were not triggered by the United States acting abroad, and the United States brought in people essentially as refugees or near refugees, right? And we did this historically, and they came and stayed and created the foundation of much of America today. But because of that, we have a long tradition of associating movement into North America with immigration rather than just simply expatriate. But all those people, every single one of them, without exception, was an expat. That they became an immigrant may have happened at the same time, may have happened later, and for many never happened at all. So these are important things. But part of this is because North America is so physically isolated from the rest of the world that people who move there for a long period of time typically are doing so to stay, right? Because they're coming for careers, they're coming for escaping a situation in some other place, and so they're often going through a very difficult journey. This is historically, right? When we're talking boats and stuff, it was really hard to come to North America in many cases. So it was a giant investment in time and money. It often involves selling your homes and businesses abroad. So the commitment basically meant you were either stuck, you had to immigrate, or it was just so valuable to just make the best of it, right? So we have a completely different view of what people moving into a country would look like because it's so much less likely to be temporary. But if you were looking in Europe, for example, people would become expats as part of standard tradition, doing the grand tour 1 to 2 years. This is for the wealthy, of course, going around Europe and living in different countries as just a normal course of event. No one said, oh no, these immigrants, right? They were just expats, people on long-term travel. They were basically the equivalent of digital nomads. They were just analog nomads at the time, and they were living abroad. And we do this throughout Latin America. We do this throughout Southeast Asia. So much of the world still has this very simple expatriate movement where people are very rarely, quite literally very, very rarely, maybe 1 to 5% of the time, coming to those places with the intent of staying permanently. And of course, not all manage to stay permanently, but the goal of people doing that is much different. And of course, this happens in US and Canada as well, but the percentages do still shift. We still have it's very hard to get into these countries. We do it less casually because nearly all of Latin America, nearly all of Africa, nearly all of Southeast Asia are very low cost, very safe, and very welcoming to digital nomads, expats, and other groups. People tend to go there because the United States and Canada are very difficult, very expensive, somewhat dangerous, right? They have a lot of things that make, well, I'm not going to go there casually, but if that's where my career is, yeah, I'll make the leap. So you have different sets of factors that tend to play in. So we still have a very heavy immigration rate into the United States and a very heavy expat non-immigration rate into most of these other areas. So that's just a natural thing. So there is some reason why we have a tendency to think in this way, but it's mostly unfair. And when we're referring to people who are coming into the U.S. to work and don't plan on making, a multi-generational shift, or there's there for, 1 to 10 years to build up a nest egg or whatever, or ride out a situation. There's a famine somewhere. They know it's not going to last forever, but they want to be somewhere with food for a few years, obviously, right? Then those are expats, even if they're nomads, even if they're working, even if they're, making a bit of a life, they're still not Immigrants, very, very clear. So this is important linguistically because we use it to disparage groups, or we use it to create that fear, uncertainty, and doubt where it doesn't apply. So other countries don't do that typically to Americans. They don't refer to us as immigrants, and it wouldn't make sense because linguistically it's clearly incorrect. But the United States has made such a push to use this socially incorrectly that we really do use it that way. Now, it is important to note, and I say this a lot, you can't directly translate these things into Spanish in Spanish. And this does give a little bit of excuse to people who are not fluent in English and are coming from a Spanish background. So just like, it's very common for, Americans to, or English speakers, right, to, but Americans have a tendency to interface with Spanish a whole lot more, might use words like embarrassed, thinking that it means what it does in English, and it means pregnant, right? In Spanish, if you translate it directly, it's very easy to accidentally use a word that means something quite different, and shows some underlying cultural things, right? In most of the world, being pregnant is a joyous thing, but in North America and English-speaking countries, it's an embarrassing thing, and it became the word that we use as embarrassed, even though that should be the last thing that being pregnant is, right? Like, what a joyful occasion having a child. Every country in the world now is like, how do we have more children? And yet our language ties the traditional Latin word for being pregnant to this negative thing in English of being embarrassed. Very strange. Tells you a lot about the cultures. But more importantly, when you're dealing with things like the term expat, Americans especially, but English speakers in general, think of expat with a very positive light, which you shouldn't. It's a neutral, right? It doesn't mean something good. It doesn't mean that they're wealthy. It doesn't mean anything. It just means you live outside your home country. So all the negatives and all the positives are lumped into that. But we have a tendency to think of it positively because people promote it as you only say that when it's a positive thing, which is not true. That would be deceptive if someone was doing that. And then we think of immigrant as negative for some reason, even though there's nothing negative about immigration. Obviously, negative things can be lumped into immigration, but nothing about the word implies anything negative whatsoever. And that you're able to be an immigrant does imply some good things. Now, it's really important when you switch this to Spanish, the word that derives from expat is incredibly negative. It's negative to the point that it implies you are a criminal who has been deported from their own country. It means you've been excommunicated from the nation of your birth, right? So you don't want to use this loosely in Spanish because it means something really dramatic, whereas immigrante does not in any way have a negative connotation, but it does imply that you're an immigrant. Now we got to talk about that. So you can't use immigrant outside the United States loosely. And in the United States, it's still lying. But the U.S. just looks the other way on a lot of deceitful things. But to the rest of the world, if you tell someone you're an immigrant, now if you just say it to your friends, it doesn't really matter. But if you start telling people in public, you start telling government officials, right? You're somewhere and you decide to have this attitude and you go to a government official in most countries and you don't use expat, but you use immigrant in English or you use immigrant in Spanish because they do overlap. That's lying to a government official. That implies that you have residency with the intent to be permanent, right? There's a lot of situations where even if you have residency, you can't use that word. I have a permanent residency, but a temporary residency would not count for that. A digital nomad visa would not count for that. Under normal circumstances, the language does not permit that. Now, many places understand that there are people who just don't get the language and they might look the other way, but you are putting yourself at risk for lying to a government official about your migratory status. Like, this is a really careful thing. You don't want to lie to someone, a border control agent, about your passport status, right? Think about that in a U.S. context. You went up to a border agent and they say, what is your status? And you just lie about it, right? Because you have this bee in your bonnet about, I think that people should use these words incorrectly, so I'm going to use them incorrectly. And then you flat out lie to a border control agent, not advised anywhere in the world. And this comes up, and that was a long introduction because Eric sent me this video of this expat who lives in Thailand, and they very carefully put on their paperwork, on their visas, non-immigrant. Now, he lives there full time as an expat. He is not an immigrant, nor is he allowed to call himself an immigrant. And Thailand is definitely one of those countries where lying to border control would be problematic. Thailand does not take things like lying to government officials lightly, and they don't take, advertising false status lightly. So even though we think of Thailand as a pretty cool, chill place, and for most part it is, right? right? Go have a drink and sit on the beach, go to Bangkok and party. Like, that stuff works out fine for most people. But if you're talking about trying to live there full time and you're trying to skirt the system, or you want to write your own rules and you don't want to have to be honest with the government, that's probably not the right place for you. There aren't many places that would be the right place for you. Probably best to stay home. But if we're talking about this is really important that places like Thailand go to such a point that they print in English, a language they don't even speak heavily. They print on their paperwork that you are not an immigrant, so that people making these claims cannot claim that they didn't know. They can't claim to be confused. They can't claim that they weren't aware or anything of the sort, and they differentiate the different types of visas so that it's very clear. You look at it and you know instantly. There's no ambiguity. Is this an immigrant or a non-immigrant residency? So the same thing here, but we don't write those words on it. But most of the residencies are non-immigrant. Some, like mine, are immigrant. So calling me an immigrant is accurate, but calling me an immigrant based on my videos is not. The only thing you know from my videos, other than me telling you that I'm an immigrant, is that I'm an expat. And my videos are meant for expats. 95 to 99% of my audience watching these videos, including all the ones who probably do want to come and live very long term in Nicaragua or Latin America, are unlikely to be looking to become immigrants or have plans or anything that's going to move them in that direction. They want to be expats. They may think they want to be immigrants because they're confused about the word based on where they're coming from, but they in reality are probably looking to be expats. So it's just important that I wanted to point this out. This is always a discussion that goes on because there's so many people who are so adamant about tricking people into using these terms wrongly, whether it's to harm certain groups or to just a prank to try to harm people, just out of hatred, out of thinking it's funny that maybe you'll get arrested over something like this. Who knows? But I wanted to point this out, that this is a case where the government, not this one, but a government has gone to such a point of saying you can't call yourself an immigrant. And like we said, in most of the world, lying in publication is also a crime. I can't go on TV and say I'm an immigrant when I'm not. That would be illegal. It may not be a major crime. It may just be a slap on the wrist, maybe but that's a good way to get, some scrutiny on you, if nothing else. But certainly in Thailand, it looks like you really can't do that. But I can't go on social media and claim to be an immigrant. I can't, just like anything else, right? All those people who are selling those crypto scams and trying to convince you that you can just move money across borders and skip all the laws because you use crypto, like it gets you out of legal requirements. Those people are promoting money laundering. They're trying to get you caught committing a crime because they think it's funny or something, right? And truly, the internet is full of trolls who are going to try to get you caught, not because they're getting something out of it other than just the pure joy of hating you and hoping to do you harm. So watch out for this stuff, because there's a lot of people instantly. The topic here will be full of comments of nasty people trying to lie to you, and they won't watch the video. They won't watch this and say, oh yeah, he's going to call me out even before I do it because it's so predictable and lame. But they're going to do it. They're going to go, you're an immigrant, right? But I am, and I've said that I am, but my audience is not, by and large. And what they do need to know is what they are, right? Being confused by what you are is definitely going to cause a problem. But don't push people to lie about their status. Don't push people to money launder. All those things are just telling people to do something illegal is generally illegal. Pushing someone to commit a crime, even if it's a minor one, is still a crime. And yet that's not something we want to be doing, right? Especially without, like, oh, just commit crimes. Why? Just because it's funny? That's pretty lame, right? If you want to make a social statement and you're committing crime to make a social statement, hey, have at it. That's great. But don't be dishonest about it and claim it's not really a crime because I didn't know, or it's just funny to be illegal. That's not the case, right? So that's just stupid. So we don't want people doing that. We don't want people getting misled in that way. So understanding that there are strict laws about this around the world. There are strict laws about what is and isn't an immigrant. The English language is super clear as to what's an expat and an immigrant, and you can hear it when you say it. You don't need to actually stop and analyze it. Once you really think about what you're saying, you know that your brain is instantly going, oh, expat, living outside my country. You hear it in the word immigrant, permanent resident of a new place. You kind of hear that. Those things are built in. We know as native English speakers that is the case, but we misuse it so much it just rolls off the tongue. But once you stop and think about it, it's really easy to go like, oh, of course, obviously that's what it means in English. It's straightforward, right? Same thing with, can you move money around borders without following any of the laws? Of course you have to follow the laws. Why do you think there's all these really strict laws that say you can't move more than $10,000 over a border without declaring it? You have to go through all these banking things. Oh, but I found this. I'm just going to do this thing that exactly defies the law and just ignore the law, well, okay, but you'd better admit to people that that's what you're doing. Don't pretend that you thought it wasn't illegal. Obviously, you thought it was illegal. Don't be promoting people doing that on our channel. So just to be clear, it is not okay to ever attempt to coerce someone to commit a crime on my comments. If you tell someone to money launder, you are breaking the rules. Not allowed to do that. Instant ban. If you lie about someone's status to try to harm them, instant ban. I'm not going to discuss it. You all know that that's what it is. So this is just the forewarning. So later when someone says, oh, how was I supposed to know? It's right here in the video. Don't be mean. Don't be cruel. Don't be dishonest. And don't try to harm others, right? That's simple. Be honest. And if you want to do something that's illegal, just be honest. Well, I think this illegal thing makes sense for me. Hey, that's great, but don't try to pretend it's legal. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. It comes directly to me. It's like Patreon. And of course, get in those comments. And as long as they're nice comments and meant to be positive and constructive, get down there, say hello, and ask your questions. Of course, you can always send in a video. All the information you could possibly need is in the show notes, and I will see all of you tomorrow.